Okay, we're recording. So even though almost all of you know about roots, I'm just going to make a short introduction so we all remember. Roots in Hebrew is Shorashim, in Arabic Judur, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. Roots works in the heart of the conflict in the Palestinian territories that many of us Israeli Jews call Judea and Samaria. There, which means here, the endeavor to build human bridges of acceptance, recognition, partnership, trust, and empathy between the two peoples, Palestinians and Israelis, who live side by side but completely separate from one another. Through face-to-face meetings and joint programs, we try to begin to heal what I call the hubris of exclusivity, a disease that leads both sides to deny the existence, the narrative, and legitimacy of the other side. We roots believe that we're laying the human groundwork that's necessary for a political solution that will bring peace and justice to this tiny strip of land that both sides call home. I'll add that in the US, we have a partner organization, the American Friends of Roots. They support the work we do here on the ground in the Holy Land, and they try to connect as much as they can to the work we're doing to try and end bloodshed, suffering, and injustice that defines the lives of Israelis and Palestinians. I'll just add that Sarah, who's on the call today, is about to join the board of the American Friends of Roots, and perhaps others of you might be interested in doing that. We're Jews, Christians, and Muslims who are supporting the work of Roots from America. Let me try and mute everyone so we don't have too much noise in the background. I did that. I just want to tell everyone that this is the fourth in a series. We did a presentation about a month ago before Passover about what Passover, the Jewish holiday Passover, teaches us about the proper way of relating to the other, the stranger, the weak, the downtrodden, and we related that to Israelis and Palestinians. After that, the week later, or 2 weeks later, we did a program on Palestinian perspectives on the Holocaust, which was really, really powerful. We had 3 Palestinians speaking. One of them had been to Auschwitz to visit the death camps. After that, we had a program on mourning jointly, mourning together. I'm sorry, mourning jointly, mourning separately, relating to how Israelis and Palestinians mourn their dead, those that died in this conflict, were killed in this conflict. Next week, on Monday night, May 11th, not at this time, but at a half hour later, 9 p.m. Jerusalem time, we're going to do a program on the Nakba, the Palestinian tragedy, because that week ends with Nakba Day, the May 15th, Friday, May 15th is the day that Palestinians remember their tragedy of 1948, when much of their culture and their people were uprooted and decimated. We're going to hear from 3 Palestinians talking about their perspectives about the Palestinian tragedy. The week after that, the week of May 17th and 18th, we're going to hear from the Roots Youth Group, 3 or 4 of our Palestinian Israeli high school students who are part of the youth group program of Roots. And the week after that, on the week of May 24th, 25th, Sunday, Monday, that's a few days before the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, I'm going to make a presentation about what Shavuot, the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, teaches us about relationships to the other, the stranger. One of the main readings on that holiday is about a stranger who came to join the Jewish people from the outside and the way she was treated. The last thing I'll say before we begin is please donate to Roots. We really, really need your support. To go to the website, friendsofroots.net, www.friendsofroots.net, and there you can donate whatever is comfortable for you to make sure that these programs and all the programs of Roots, creating a better future for Israelis and Palestinians, can continue. So we have tonight with us Shaul and Noor, and I won't say anything about them because they're going to introduce themselves. And then we'll go to the questions. So Shaul, introduce yourself.
Great, thank you, Hanan. And welcome everybody. I'll say welcome to myself. I don't feel exactly at home, even though we're all at home. This new format for us. Noor and I were talking just about how we want to open up the evening or morning. And first thing we were wondering, do people have questions that are waiting prime to ask? because it's an Ask Me Anything session. It's really the goal, the invitation today is really to ask us questions and let that be the source of the conversation here. But then we said, what if nobody has anything, that people don't have a question, what are we going to do? So we both said we kind of just talk a little bit how we got to Roots, and why we're here, and since why we're still here. Everybody knows that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is likely not going to end in the next candidacy of any prime minister, president, or elected official that we're in. It's a long haul, and it's been a long haul because it's ups and it's downs. It doesn't look particularly optimistic today. If you want to bet on a winning horse, there's probably other things to bet on, but that's not the reason why I'm in Roots. So I guess my story, some people here have heard it, some people have visited us on site, some people here are family. But I moved to Israel in the year 2000, arrived here just a few months before the second Intifada broke up, the second uprising, the Palestinian uprising that, from 2000 to 2005, which is there's different names for that conflict, and people call by different names. Some people call it the Al-Aqsa Intifada, the uprising that came out of the Mosque of Al-Aqsa in the Temple Mount and Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem. Other people call it the Oslo War, the war that came about because of the Oslo peace process, which is also interesting perspective of what that means. But anyway, what I always like to say to groups and people trying to give a sense of what this conflict is about for me, and it's there's the politics, there's the religion, there's all these levels of identity on which we live the conflict, but at its core, it's a very raw conflict. It's anger and fear, and that emotional part of the conflict is something that I think anybody who's spent a little time here in those tense moments has felt in their blood on either side, and that's for a lot of what carries it, and for me too. So I come from it in a sense, starting from that personal place, but also then recognizing the larger pictures going on here. And there's a few pictures on my wall. One is Rav Kook, Rabbi Avram Isaac. I'll try to flip this around here. Is Rabbi Kook, who was a big inspiration for me in my Jewish thinking, understanding a vision of Judaism. And one of the things that most inspired me, Rav Kook, was his tenacious holding on to both the particular story of the Jewish people and the universal vision of how our people's story fits into this global picture, this tapestry of humanity and history. And I think sometimes when Rabbi Nachman of Breslau said the whole world is a narrow bridge, and the main thing is not to fall, it's not to be afraid, not to make ourselves afraid. I think we spend a lot of times feeling afraid. Are we being too particular? Are we being too just having our story only? Are we being too universal? Are we having too much a big perspective? And walking that narrow bridge is, always going back and forth in those two sides. Years of moments of conflict stick you in your story. And sometimes you feel caged by those stories. Sometimes if you have that, I think that spirit seeking for something more. I term it in terms of redemption. My vision of redemption of the Jewish people's story of return. How does that lead to redemption? It leads to a fixed relationship with the nations around us, with the entire world. But obviously, most first and foremost is that nation we're living with here in this holy land of Israel and Palestine. And that challenge for me is a divine project. It's part of what God's challenge of the state and everything it means coming back. And for that, I'll pull off. So here was my teacher, Rabbi Menachem Fruman, who was really an inspiration, kind of my gateway into this work. He passed away about 7 years ago, just over 7 years ago. But for many years, he kind of led a different voice in approaching the conflict, which really deeply began with religious identities and connection to land. Those kind of more base or primitive parts of our identities here, and says, we have to go there. We have to start there, maybe. We have to touch those places, and if we don't engage those parts of ourselves in our societies, we're missing deep parts of this land. So, like I said, this is supposed to be very short. Through Rabbi Fruman's work, we started a group of us trying to make things happen on the ground, and he was meeting on the top levels with Palestinian leadership and Muslim leadership, both in Israel, Palestine, and abroad. But on the ground, what's going on? And right after he passed away, about a year after he passed away, we got introduced to a group of Palestinian activists led by the Abu Awad family, Ali and Khalid, and we're confronted with a very powerful, it's nice in Israeli-Palestinian work when you meet a Palestinian who kind of sees the Israeli perspective, If you're a Palestinian, you meet a Jew or an Israeli who really sees the Palestinian perspective. And it feels good. It's much more challenging when you meet someone from the other side who really believes in their story. But to find somebody who really believes in their story and is committed to their story, but also sees your story and is open to what that means, and not to tell you what your story is, but to hear what your story is and go through that process. That's how Roots got started for me, was meeting people from the other side who were powerful leaders in their own society, but had come to some very deep process of their own understanding who we were, and that was impressive. And then also the willingness to learn along the way. And so Roots got started with that, in a sense, on that basis of understanding each other, of meeting, of also living in the very front line of the conflict. And there's a deep potency in the work, I think, in where we are, in trying to do this work in the midst of everything, of occupation and terror and settlements and return, all these stories, and refugees, and all these majors of the conflict are there, just in the room with the people who come to Roots. Many of them come to them with all those stories, bereaved families, kids on both sides that grew up with the pain of this conflict. And for me, there's something very powerful about it. It doesn't allow us to float, to get too floaty in the whole piece. Let's sit together, sharing. It's so beautiful. There's a very powerful reality around us, and I think that's something that the peace camp needs that holds us very moored in reality here. And okay, so why am I still in Roots after 6 years of amazing things and frustrating things and coming to terms with things I didn't want to see and more? It's because I really believe in the people that live in this part of the land. I really believe in my neighbors. Even in my side, I live in Tekoa, which is a settlement, but I know my neighbors. I spend a lot of time, especially in Corona, we spend a lot of time together. And I believe my Palestinian neighbors, I believe in my Israeli neighbors. There's people on the ground here that I really believe in, and there's work to do here, a lot of work to do. That's understatement of the new century, but that's why I'm here.
And I'll just add that Shaul is the Israeli co-director of Roots, together with Khalid Abu Awad. Is Noor here?
Yes, Hanan, I'm with you.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Noor. I am a member of Roots now for 4 years. I have been participating in Roots activities. I'm mostly speaking to groups that visit us, that visit the center in Gush Etzion, Karama Center, the center where a lot of our activities and Roots actually takes place. And I am a member of the steering committee taking decisions about weekly activities and programs that happen at Roots. I just want to start by saying that this is my third time actually doing a Zoom meeting, and it's not my thing in a way. Maybe some people might find this surprising, as thinking of me as a young person, as a millennial that's supposed to be like foretaken that video calling and these kind of stuff is like easy for me, but actually it's not. I don't have the setup like actually Shaul has, with all of the pictures and the connections to the story. I have Times Square behind me, New York. And I'm very sad about the news that's coming actually from the US, from New York. So how I joined Roots, actually it goes back to my story. I just want to mention a little bit about my family. My family and my story usually I say goes back to 1948. It started 42 years before I was born. I was born in 1991 in Amman in Jordan. But my family are Palestinians, and both of my grandparents were born in Jerusalem, in southwest of Jerusalem, a small village called Malha. They grew up there, they got married there. And then in 1948, when the battles around Jerusalem was going on and the massacre of Deir Yassin took place, many of the people of my village start to basically flee and run away to the nearby city of Bethlehem, going to the refugee camp that the United Nations established for them. Both of my grandparents went to the refugee camp, they end up there. Some of my family members actually fought in the 1948. but most of my family ended up in the refugee camps. My parents were born in Bethlehem. Some of my uncles were born in the refugee camp. My grandfather, he didn't want to stay in the refugee camp forever. So after 2 years of staying there, he decided to just move outside of it to the city of Bethlehem itself. And he rented a small house, which is actually my family still live in the same house since then, since 1951. And later in the 1980s, my father actually decided to move. He felt that there is no hope for him to stay here. There is no hope for him in this country to build a future. So he actually wanted to go to Europe. And he usually say, just to make the story short, for some reasons, he ended up actually staying in Jordan. So he didn't really move that far away. And my mother, who was a nurse in Jerusalem during the first Intifada, and she's a relative of my father, she ended up actually going to Amman. They got married there, and that's how I was born. Now, my family had this actually, this sign of hope when the Oslo Peace Accords were signed. And that's the moment for them when they decided to end about like 10 years almost living in Jordan, and they wanted to come back to the West Bank here. And they said, there will be a new state of Palestine, and there is no more occupation, and there will be freedom. And let's go and build a new life there. So that's when I came here, came back home. My family, my parents moved back. We lived in Beit Sahur, which is a suburb of Bethlehem. And I usually think of that time as a very normal time. I think I had like a very normal childhood. I didn't really encounter the conflict. The conflict wasn't part of my life at early age. When I was young, I have a lot of memories about going to Jerusalem and how easy that used to be comparing to today, and how we used to do it every week, and especially on Fridays, to go to pray at Al-Aqsa, the noble sanctuary, the Temple Mount. I always like have stories, and I remember those times. So that's how I remember the 1990s. Of course, the conflict was taking place and the peace process at the same time. And those major events in 1996, 97, 98, until 2000, when the second Intifada broke out. And as Shaul said, in a way, the Intifada had a huge impact on the people here. And I think especially I can say on my generation. When the Intifada started, I was like about 10, 11 years old. And there was a lot of violence around us. And all of a sudden now, there is no free. So I was dealing with that. I started to deal with that. And it wasn't easy to really understand it, to understand that I can't move as I used to before. And my first image, I can say, of the Israelis when I kind of like grew up and I start to realize the environment around me was the image of the soldiers and the invading tanks during the second Intifada, and the siege on the church, and everything we have to go through. Of course, that's you can add this to the heritage that I have from my family about the stories of the 1948 and the Nakba, and how they had to leave their villages and homes and what happened. So that's I have a classical story, like a classical Palestinian story, and look at the Israelis as our worst enemy, as like the ultimate evil, bad things that happened to us. And so the Intifada has a huge effect on me. And just because of time, I want to kind of like move on to say that around 2014, when I decided to study to become a tour guide here in Bethlehem, and I actually started guiding in 2014, I was like active politically. I mean, I was using tour guiding as a tool to basically spread the knowledge and the awareness to foreigners and visitors who come to the country, to Israel and Palestine, about the situation that we are going through, about the condition and the circumstances that are imposed on us by the Israelis, and what the Israeli occupation actually means, and what's the Palestinian story. And so I did that a lot, and I consider it as not just like doing a job, but actually it was, you can say, also sort of political activism for me. So from there, I guided a lot of groups who are interested politically in what's happening here in Israel and Palestine, in this region, trying to understand more the conflict, trying to understand the point of views on each side, the arguments on each side. I was always like dedicating myself to basically make the best argument and to deny everything that the other side is saying, and all of that. So long story short, one day I actually had a group to guide in the area, actually in Hebron. And after a tense day of guiding this American group of students around the city of Hebron, and especially the old city, and showing them the occupation, actually I had a very interesting moment, I can call it, with actually meeting with an Israeli settler who lives there, which is maybe not the typical, I don't know how to call it, but it's not, that man I met, he wasn't a roots kind of guy. He was maybe like me, but on the other side, you know, using his personal story and trying to defend his nation, his right to be here, to live here, and what he is doing, and what his people are doing, and what his government is doing. So it was actually one of the few times that I was able to meet an Israeli in person and listen to what they are actually saying, what they are actually believing about who they are and what they are doing to us. It was not, how I would say it, it was not maybe a humanistic meeting, or like it wasn't a meeting that's normal, you know. There is still the feeling that he's a settler and he has a pistol, he has a gun with him. And we were in an area surrounded by Israeli soldiers and all of that. So I did that meeting with the group, and I left Hebron and I went back to Bethlehem. On the way back, I had to go to Roots, and I had no idea about what Roots actually is. And there I discovered actually an alternative to this situation that we are living. Meeting Hanan was one of the most inspiring moments in my life. It was a transforming for me, because I met this person, this human being, a Jew, a Zionist, Israeli, proud of his identity, but at the same time still able to see the sufferings that's caused to us by his side, and to acknowledge that, and to show empathy with it, and to try to talk about, like, genuinely from the heart, how we can really solve this problem, not just about borders and lines and what you get and what I get, but actually how can we implement both of our rights at the same time? How can we coexist? How we can live together and at the same time respect each other? So meeting Hanan was, as I said, inspiring for me. And through Hanan, I got to know more about Roots and the activists at Roots. I met also Ali Abu Awad, the co-founder, one of the Abu Awad family members, and the co-founder of Roots. So that's my story in a short way.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you, Shaul. We have now about 8 questions that people have either written to us by email or put in the chat box. So I'm going to read the first question. It came to us by email. The person who asked the question is actually not in this conversation right now, but I assume he will hear the recording. This is from Jeff Anderson. And he asks, what are the economic realities of the differences in social safety nets of Israelis, of Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and how does that impact peacemaking? Then he has a second question, which I'll read, I guess, after Shaul and Noor deal with the first question. To say it again, what are the economic realities of the difference in social safety nets in Israel and Palestine, and how does that impact peacemaking? So either Shaul or Noor, whoever wants to go first.
I mean, the economic realities in Palestinian society and Israeli society are very different, and it's also a really big. I'm not an economist in all the ways to think about it. How does it affect peacemaking? Is another level of trying to think about the question. And I understand this is not specifically about the Corona process right now, because right now we're in a place where vast swaths of society are out of work, and if there is government, and that's one of the big discrepancies. I can point that as an example of how it comes up. And we face this in roots. In Israel, people who, like myself, who take a leave of absence, I can claim my unemployment payments from the government. That's there for me. In the Palestinian society, that level of net is not there. Just think about it. It does deeply remind me of something that Fadi, one of the Roots partners, once told me. We were talking about these issues about economics and the differences, and he said something that stuck with me since then. Was this that in the place of state institutions, Palestinian Authority is an authority, but it's not a state. It has no points of export. It has no income. It's all tied through this whole. It's tied through agreements in the Oslo Accords that haven't been changed or updated since 1993. Issues of trade and world economies have changed since then, and that's one of the places I think on a political level, in terms of the process of building goodwill, which is something we deeply need right now, readdressing some of those kinds of arrangements on the economic arrangements between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, which are stuck in they're stuck for the economies of the 1990s, which, given everything that's changed since then, and globalization and tech and technology are really outdated. But what he said to me was this. He said, Shaul, in Israel, if a check bounces or the bank doesn't come through, or your bank forecloses, or if you're sick or there, that those state institutions, your bank, the insurance, the government is there. It has your back. And he said to me, we don't have any of that. I have my family. I have my extended family who are there to support me. And but the authorities aren't in the place where they do or can, or I don't know if the can or do is another statement, are there to support us. And it's really that family network of clan or large extended family is there to support us, and that's what we have. Larger families have more, smaller families have less, and that's a huge difference between the society. How that translates to peace building, I think there's a very clear economic disparity between the societies. It's not across the board. There's very wealthy parts of Palestinian society, there's very poor parts of Israeli society, and vice versa. And those economic realities do impact the where people's political perspectives are sometimes. But we see this in Roots work. And I think there's a level of what does peace mean, and what does that mean to you, and can you worry about peace when you're worrying about economic realities? What's more important for you? Is it, if right now putting bread on the table is a very important thing for you, then that's as important as whether there's going to be a peace agreement or not. And maybe so there's that, it comes to play in many ways. I'll try to also keep these answers brief. Otherwise, I know what I do. Noor.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Shaul actually said and how he described the situation. It's like when I think about the situation now, like I take, for example, like what's happening now in this in this pandemic situation with the COVID-19. It's really problematic because the Palestinian Authority on one hand is losing a lot of money that usually comes from taxes, like for example, taxes on fuel. And in March, the demand on fuel dropped 75%. So on one hand, I kind of understand like the situation that the Palestinian Authority is going through. On the other hand, many Palestinians complain and feel that the Palestinian Authority could do better to the people, but because of corruption, they don't do. And that is not necessarily this accusation is not necessarily coming with a clue to this corruption, but rather with a general feeling among the people here. And it's usually like comparing what Israel is doing to what the Palestinian Authority is doing toward their people. So there's a lot of like comparison happens when Palestinians are talking about the Palestinian Authority actions on the ground, and that does affect, as Shaul said, like the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, the dynamic. Palestinians are always looking, mostly they are looking for like economical benefits out of the relationship with Israelis, and the question of putting a bread on the table for a dinner for a family is more important sometimes than all of these big questions about about annexation and about like two-state solution and all of these things. So many people are in this level on this level in the Palestinian society. So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
I'll send. There's a very deep parallel in the Israeli society. The questions with the stuckness of the peace process. The last 7 years of Israeli politics, you find the economic questions and the economic realities in Israel, which, albeit GDP is very different and much higher than the Palestinian authorities, but still cost of living, people struggling to make ends meet. Those issues have come to dominate a lot of the political discourse more than the questions about the conflict. And that's there's various reasons behind it. That's also true in Israeli society, that in parts of Israeli society. Let's go to the next question.
Jeff asked the second part of the question. He said, in spite of these realities, what positive story could you share to talk about ways peacemaking is continuing?
Well, there are lots. If I think of a snapshot of what's happened, and it's not about COVID, it's not about the pandemic, it's in general term, despite the economic, despite all the economic realities in other parts of the conflict, there's still a lot of contact, much less contact than there used to be. There's still contact between Israelis and Palestinians, and even that economic contact, which we can be critical about. I have a very critical side of saying, oh, it's nice we have these employer relationships, or we see each other in a place of commerce. I can disparage those and kind of deconstruct them and say why they're horrible. And I can also say that on the other hand, there are some positives that are maintainable. They do create a meeting. I think there's a danger in letting that meeting stay in that context. But I see places where those meetings don't take place, and I see where that brings us. I think there's 30,000 Palestinians who work in settlements every single day, or in industrial areas of settlements. I imagine that's not a first choice, but there's a reality there, and I think one of the challenges of the peace camp is sometimes to be a little bit more pragmatic, not to leave the big issues, but to address those real issues. And those are places we can build. And I think something that some of the leaders in Roots from the beginning have said, let's address those issues. Let's go there. I recognize the slippery slope there. Are we embedding current political inequalities through economic realities, etc.? But at the same time, that's also a deep part of partnership. Partners of ours have been working in Kfar Adumim, which is an Israeli town, a settlement near the Jordan Valley, on the way outside of Jerusalem, and they've made connections with the Jahalin, which is a Bedouin communities around them. And right now, they've done a tremendous job of raising money and connecting with Israeli farmers who are selling them produce at cost, or donating produce to them and distributing it to some of the most abandoned communities, definitely by the Palestinian Authority and definitely the Israeli Authority. And they've been tremendous every day, going up and doing pickups and distributing food to families in need all around that area. And it's a group of settlers and mainstream Israelis and left-wing Israelis all working together with local Palestinians to make that happen. That's just a tiny little story of something positive going on right now. At Roots, we've handled a couple of donations for Israelis who asked us. They have Palestinian friends who they know are going through a really hard time in the Corona thing, and being able to help them support those families in different ways. At Roots ourselves, making some of you people around the world have helped support kind of a drive to give families a little bit of extra something during Ramadan and Iftar. There's that level of things that are happening. I can also speak about some engagement in standing up for Palestinian rights, Palestinians. I published this story in the newsletter I announced this talk about the bad and the good and the bad and the good wrapped together, about some Israeli youths are going out and harassing Palestinians coming to work their farmlands, and other Israelis from the same communities coming in and intervening, and we're kind of following that story every day right now. So there's still a lot going on within all this.
Noor, do you want to tell some hopeful story?
Yeah, I just want to share that I don't have like a close story to me, but like in the last 2 months in general, I've been spotting and hearing and seeing actually some actions or stories that takes place between Palestinians and Israelis. Like especially in this time when people felt that there's a danger that's threatening all of us. There is maybe a common enemy, we can call it. I heard and I read stories on social media about a lot of like the staff in Israeli hospital, the Arab staff in Israeli hospital, Palestinians who are working in Israeli hospitals, whether from the West Bank or from within the Green Line, from the Arab villages and the cities, and how their efforts were recognized by many of the Israeli community all around Israel, and trying also to use that to utilize these stories to spread basically a new discourse that we as Palestinians and as Israelis, as Muslims and Jews and Christians we are similar. We have a lot of similarities. So there were a lot of like political negative events, and there is like the fear of annexation now and all of these things. But at the same time, even on social media, even in like on toxic social media, I was able to spot these stories of hope, like a Muslim man who's praying to a Jewish man at the same time they are praying next to each other. And like I remember when there were some videos that went viral on Palestinian social media of religious Jews who are actually putting to Quran as a way of like praying to God or asking God for help and recognition, and how many Palestinians all of a sudden took that as like a very good gesture. Maybe it confused many Palestinians, because I had a lot of conversations with my friends, like why religious Jews now, why they are like listening to Quran, we were like discussing the similarities between Jewish faith and Muslim faith, and what people feel about that maybe on the other side. So that's what I have.
I can't not tell this story. There was a scene that went on very right-wing social media. I saw it passing through, and it was in a hospital where there are COVID patients and a lot of elderly patients, and it was Passover. It was the Seder night, and there was this video of a Arab, a Palestinian Israeli nurse reading out the 4 questions, reading the Haggadah. This group of Jewish patients there. It was absolutely, I mean, I tear up thinking about it. It was an absolutely beautiful moment, and it really, like Noor said, this moment of humanity that can get touched here in the space of this threat that everybody feels. There's a little vulnerability that's there. There's definitely some very powerful stories that happen there going on.
Thank you, Noor Shaul. The next question was written to me on the chat in private, but it's meant for everyone to be heard. It's certainly a weighty question, a controversial question. Penny T asked the following: why does the Palestinian Authority keep their people living as refugees?
I think that's a question for me. So, like, I'm not sure from where to start. Like, I'm trying to understand what the person means by the question.
Penny, do you want to elaborate on the question? I just unmute you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Noor. Thank you so much. I met Rabbi Hanan and Ali many years ago, and been following Roots through the years, and was in Israel a couple of times. The second time was quite different because it was during the beginnings of Operation Protective Edge. So it turned a family vacation into seeing incredible sights and running to bomb shelters, and started me on my journey of wanting to work on peace. And I have a book, etc. But to me, You know, I read about, you know, and read about the money coming from the US. I live in the US. And often the PA spending that on building tunnels and so on and so forth. And I'm certain this is a one-sided viewpoint, but in my head, I think their money could certainly be more well spent helping the people. And so I guess I want to understand the Palestinian side more because I feel very ignorant about it.
Thank you. Okay, I think, you know, when you are talking about the Palestinian Authority building tunnels or how they are misusing their money, I think in a way you are meaning Hamas. You are talking about Hamas in Gaza. Because in a way, there are two authorities within the Palestinian territories. There is the Palestinian Authority that's in control of the West Bank, and there is Hamas Authority, which is in control of Gaza since 2007. And Hamas actions on the ground and how they are spending money and how they are dealing with it, that's another whole like issue. I live in Bethlehem here, which is in the West Bank, and I live under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority and at the same time under the Israeli military law. So the Palestinian Authority, the general feeling among people here is that the Palestinian Authority can always do better, but because of corruption inside the authority, it's not doing better, it's not doing enough. But as I was saying, that's in many cases, and many times, that's a feeling that people have. And there are stories here and there. I'm not saying that there is no corruption in the Palestinian Authority. Of course, there was. 1990s, the level of corruption in the Palestinian Authority was so high. The Palestinian Authority was not really organized. The system of taxes was really very terrible. 40% of the Palestinian Authority annual budget used to come from taxes back in before 2000, back in 1990s, and it's not like maybe it's kind of an explanation why the Palestinian Authority in the 1990s was like that. I think when the PLO founded, like people from the PLO and Yasser Arafat founded the Palestinian Authority, they saw it only as temporary thing. It's not permanent. It's not a state. So they didn't put the effort enough to build a strong authority. And as I said, there was a lot of corruption. And now, after 2005, after the second intifada, the second uprising, there was a whole process to rebuild the Palestinian Authority and to basically build an infrastructure for the Palestinians to receive a state. After the peace talks that happened, especially between the government of Abu Mazen and the government of Ehud Olmert, and 2 years of negotiations back and forth from 2005 to 2007. But that also was a long time ago. Since the peace talks stopped, so the Palestinian Authority now has about 60% of the annual budget of the Palestinian Authority comes from taxes that Palestinian Authority collects from here. And there's also a huge part of the taxes that Israel collects for the Palestinian Authority. That's maybe the time when you hear that the Israeli government is sending money to the Palestinian Authority. That's the taxes that Israel is collecting, because the Palestinian Authority cannot export and import in its own. It has to use the borders, which is controlled by Israel, or the port in Haifa or in Ashdod. So that's how the relationship, the economic relationship between the two sides. Now again, this answer could take for like long time to explain, but I will say my personal perspective, my personal opinion. There is a level of corruption inside the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority can do better, but at the same time, there is huge problems and huge obstacles in front of the Palestinian Authority. And it will be totally unfair to deal with the Palestinian Authority as if it was an independent state, because it's not. At the end of the day, the Palestinian Authority was founded to be a self-autonomy in certain areas in the West Bank, Gaza, and in East Jerusalem. Today, it's even less than that. And even the officials of the Palestinian Authority to move from one area to another, they need a permission from the Israeli military in the West Bank. So at the end of the day, we are under the rule of the Israeli military in the West Bank. But many people have a very still critical point of view here of the Palestinian Authority. And as I said, in Gaza, it would be a different story. That's another subject, but that's what's in my mind about the Palestinian Authority.
Thank you, Noor. There's a question, the impact of COVID on Israeli-Palestinian dialogue. Do either of you two want to say a few words about the impact of COVID on Israeli-Palestinian dialogue?
Definitely given us what to talk about. I can speak about it in Roots specifically. Obviously, we've had to cancel a tremendous amount of our face-to-face program, and I think any group that runs programs like that has had to seriously adapt. And it's put a huge challenge. Right now is Ramadan. We'd normally be having 4 or 5 different breakfast meals together, bringing 80 to 100 people each night together. That's not happening. So next week we'll have an online check-in, online iftar a little bit, just for a few minutes to bring people together. So what I could say is, for Roots, I think the groups that we have that are ongoing groups that have been meeting together throughout the year or over past years have managed to bring that conversation onto Zoom and are keeping in touch on Zoom. A lot of the outreach, we've had kind of the open events and everything face-to-face is obviously shut down for now. And that's kind of on a technical. I think that's the same, but probably with a lot of groups. I can say reflect one interesting thing about that is, generally we meet in this safe space that's not in an Israeli town or in a Palestinian town. It's in this piece of land that's one thing that Zoom has offered us to do is to step into each other's homes. And on the kids program, where my kids send them singing a song in Hebrew and a few words in Arabic and send it to the Palestinian kids, and they send from their home. On the youth and the young adult program, where people are Skyping from their home and sharing pictures of their bedrooms, that's something we never would have thought to do without the pandemic and what that's meant. So in some ways, there's some intimacies that have been opened there, but it's also, I think it's one thing I've observed, it's also a space we're spending a lot of times in our home communities. We're spending a lot of times with the people on our block. It's a time when we're spending a lot of time entrenched really deeply inside of our stories. And what that means is we get a little bit less the other story, and that's for better and for worse. I think there's generally been there's the conflict sometimes feels a little bit of a détente, calming down, even though there's lots of things going on too. But in general, there's a feeling there's a common threat going on over there. It maybe opens up, like people like Noor and I mentioned, those social media images of people praying together, these moments of humanity that manage to stick out. So there's a little bit of a détente and a common humanity that can come forth. But there's also some very serious things, and some of the questions related to this, things brewing on the political level, the questions of annexation moving forward throughout this. There's also a lot of fear, so there's many more cases of COVID going on in Israeli society than in Palestinian society, and most of the outbreaks in Palestinian society came from Israelis. So there's a lot of Palestinians have the sense of all of the Israelis are walking carriers of COVID, which can, which pulls us into our own camps. That can feed into the us and them as well as opening up the common humanity. Like that, again, that narrow bridge. That's what I'd share about it.
The next question is for
maybe Noor. Noor also reacted.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I think Shaul, you kind of said it all, but I cannot think but the the movement, the problem of and I understand that this time maybe it's different than we are not allowed to move out of Bethlehem, and sometimes we are not allowed even to move inside Bethlehem for our safety. But actually, I feel that I was not maybe able to meet Israelis. I was able to do like before in person, but I saw when many of my Israeli friends are actually sending me these messages, and when many groups of people now starting groups of dialogue, and they have maybe time to spend on social media, more on social media, and it could be both ways. There's the negative part of people are not able to meet each other physically, but also it opened the door for other virtual meetings. People can meet each other on social media and have dialogue on social media.
Thank you. There's a question from Judith Gussman for Noor. She says, last week we heard views of Jewish Israelis about the alternative or joint memorial ceremony on the Israeli Memorial Day. I'd like to hear how the Palestinian members of Roots feel about that alternative memorial ceremony.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As a member of Roots, I can say that the idea of a joint memorial ceremony is very powerful. Powerful in the sense that it recognizes both sides deeply. It basically, it's what I'm always talking about. Like I usually say there are two reasons why I joined Roots, and those are recognition between the two sides, the recognition that I found among the people, and empathy, that even though we are standing on different sides and we are carrying like conflicted identities, but at the same time we are able to, we created the ability, or we gained the ability at Roots to be empathetic toward the other side and feel a little bit of what the other side is feeling, try to put ourselves in their shoes and look at the situation from their angle. And so that's how I personally, and as a member of Roots, that's how I view the ceremony. I will not try to hide that also it comes with a little bit of conflicted feelings, you know, because at the same day, you know, it's the other side soldiers. It's, you know, the face of the enemy of the other side. When you are talking about soldiers or Palestinians who were in violent actions or in terror actions against Israelis. So when I see an image of an Israeli soldier, it still brings up all of these feelings and emotions, and it's really hard to do with it. But at the same time, as a member of Roots, I can see, as I said, that this is like an advance. This is like a very powerful action of recognition and empathy between the two sides.
Thank you, Noor. The next question I'm reading from the chat comes from Father Russ, who is the rector of the Tantur Institute in Jerusalem. He says, it's a question for either of you. I was at a memorial for Rav Fruman last year in Tekoa, in which one of the speakers, challenging the audience, said he didn't think it was possible to consider oneself pro-peace and at the same time live in a settlement. What do you think?
I remember that. We had a good conversation afterwards about it, actually. So I guess there's various levels to this answer too. And I'm also interested in Noor's perspective on this also. You said it's for both people. I think you can't support the Oslo peace process, the Oslo peace model, and live in a settlement and call yourself although that's actually not true. There are certain members of Roots who live in Gush Etzion who told us explicitly that we support the Oslo peace process. That two-state model, the two-state model is what we believe in. In that two-state model, the majority of Gush Etzion was slated to be part of the land swaps and become a part of Israel proper. And across the road, and that would become the Palestinian territory, the Palestinian state. They say, we believe in that. That's what we want to happen. It hasn't happened yet. The majority of the settlers live in settlement blocks, which are the major parts, which were always part of the land swap. So at that point, I have to completely take, I don't agree with this statement. But that's even trying to fit our peacemaking into the models of Oslo. And I think one of the deep things that Roots believes in is, and I'd say, at the end of the day, we're not a political, we're not claiming we have the new political model. And while we spend a lot of time talking about it, it's clear we work on a slightly lower level than the political language. Our political claims the model. But we both believe that a political model and a future has to respect both people's belonging to both sides of that green line. Meaning the Palestinian story of Palestinian refugees who in the Nakba were displaced and not allowed to come home, which is today over 65% of Palestinian society, were denied that by the Oslo peace process and denied the two-state solution. And for them, and that's part of the reason why there was that much Palestinian opposition to Oslo. Likewise, on the Israeli story, the Oslo, the two-state model put a lot of us over the green line at odds with the peace model. So I think what it's about is generating both a new discourse for peace in that way, seeking new models. I think there's, then we get into some very green, there's other levels of the conflict where maybe you're right, maybe you can't be at a settlement and call yourself a peace activist. But I don't think that's true. I think peace is going to demand a lot of work from both societies. It's going to need input and support from all across the board. And without those parts of society gaining, I'm not saying we have to get the hardcore kids who are going out and throwing rocks and firebombs and that. We know that the law needs to take care of those people. But for the vast majority of people, I think there's other roads towards peace that come to the levels of equality, of belonging, of national self-determination can be achieved, that don't demand uprooting all these people from their homes or denying other people's a way to get home in peace. So that way I disagree with this statement.
Noor?
Yeah, I just want to say, I understand completely why it's very problematic for someone from outside to understand how someone could be a settler and at the same time claim that he or she is a peace activist. From my experience at Roots, I can say that I found, by the way, I met Israelis who have radical thinking in a way, or misunderstanding, or like bad ideas about Palestinians and they are not necessarily settlers. They are living in Israel proper, and what the international community call it Israel proper. And I'm not here defending on settlers. I'm not saying all settlers are good and understanding of Palestinians. But surprisingly, for anyone who visit the West Bank and have the chance to meet Israeli settlers and Palestinians, sometimes he or she might see that there is maybe more understanding of the humanity of the other side among Palestinians and Israeli settlers because they have to meet with each other. They don't have these, we have separation, of course, between us. We don't have these high walls like between us here in the West Bank and that of the rest of it. At the same time, I understand the frustration behind the statement, because if we lost the two-state solution, and we know there's no one-state solution, so what's going to be? And this is the question that many people are facing now, and they are going to face more and more in the soon or in the near future, when we are talking about the chance that Israel might annex part of the West Bank or the West Bank. What the Palestinians are going to be considered in the West Bank here in this situation. So I usually think about like what Shaul said, the definition of peace and what peace means. Because peace shouldn't mean that I am uprooting someone from their home, what they consider their home. It's like, I feel the same thing as a descendant of a Palestinian refugee. I can accept the two-state solution. I will accept the two-state solution if it happened, but I will always still call the village of where my grandparents came from, which is today in Israel proper, I will always still call it home. I think that the two-state solution will be a political plan for a solution, but that will not stop me from identifying with all of the land of Palestine and the land of Israel as my homeland. So how to move forward? I think that we need to understand today, after 25 years of failure in implementing this idea of a two-state solution, the classical two-state solution, and building borders between the two sides, I think we need to look for more, for different solutions that actually address the core of the issue. And at Roots, we usually say that the core of the issues is our identities on both sides. And we need to find a discourse on a national level, on the political level, that recognizes both sides belonging to this land. So when we are talking about a political model, this solution is supposed to respect and in a way implement both people's rights. And I say that at the same time, and I'm not saying it's an easy thing. I know maybe we are going now for maybe it's a worse level in the conflict where things are not clear. 20 years ago, we were talking about like the future Palestinian state. If it didn't happen now, few years down the road, it will happen. It will be another president, and there will be negotiations, and there will be a state finally. But now it seems that the Palestinian state is behind us, and saying that is like admitting and realizing where we are now. So how we move on from here? Many, or I can say at least some of the members of Roots, we support an idea called two states, one homeland, which talks about a confederation model between two states, a state of Israel and a state of Palestine. Both are sovereign states, but have open borders, for example. No need for people to be uprooted from where they are living. They can enjoy the ability to live as permanent residents of one of the two states, and other like solutions, like creative solutions like that. But the most important thing is also how to create a trust between the two sides and the recognition.
Yeah, thinking about it, thanks, Noor. Going back to the question, just remembering it that night at the memorial of Rabbi Fruman's, the memorial of Rabbi Fruman's passing. Rabbi Menachem Fruman was the rabbi of Tekoa, a settlement in the West Bank in Judea. He was a close confidant of Yasser Arafat, the president of the Palestinian Authority, the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Yasser Arafat offered Rabbi Fruman to be the minister of Jewish affairs in Palestine. Rabbi Fruman was a person who met with Hamas leadership and came to them with agreements about moving forward and talking about long-term ceasefires and ending the conflict. In a sense, the chutzpah to say that a person who lives in a settlement can't be a peace activist, it speaks to a very narrow definition of what peace looks like, of a very set terms of what that peace is. And also, I think, and in that way, it cuts out a deep part of reality. And I think, like Noor said, about the question of identity, he says, if the two-state solution leaves us on the other side in Tekoa and Beit El and Shiloh are in the Palestinian state, they're always going to be part of Israel because that's where our grandparents and ancestors lived. So be able to contain that identity, and I think that's what Noor was saying, that this kind of trying to generate a discourse that at first deeply acknowledges those identities and respects them, as opposed to with the claim of you can't be this and be that, and which I think is a big challenge for how we go forward in this conflict. Yeah.
There's a question that comes in the wake of what we're talking about now from Saskia Keeley, who's a member of our American Friends of Roots board in the US. She asks, if we're talking about settlements, what about expansion of settlements? How do you guys feel about expansion of settlements?
I would say that the impact of settlements on me personally and on many Palestinians is it kind of like impact the trust that that Palestinians will not be really convinced that Israelis will ever stop taking the land and building and acting as if there are no Palestinians here. So that's how I feel about settlement expansion. And again, I'm always like, this is my stand. I mean, it's maybe difficult for people to see the difference or to understand in a way what I'm saying, but I joined Roots based on recognition. So I do recognize that this is a homeland that belongs to the Jewish people as to my people at the same time. So by basically the default, like the natural outcome, when I say that this is the homeland of Shaul, this is the homeland of Hanan, then they have the right to live on this homeland as much as I do. But I disagree with the way how it's happening now, it's taking place now. The way how settlements are being built, the way how this settlement enterprise is, it's part of the conflict. It's part of the occupation that we are living under. It's not being done in a way that respects my rights, but actually it's taking away my rights. So it's very difficult to have this feeling at the same time. But that's why I'm talking about the recognition and how important it is. And it's very, very important for me when I hear recognition from Israelis, when when Israelis are talking about my right and my people right belong to the same homeland. So the expansion of settlements is definitely leading us to a worse level of the conflict. And I'm sorry, kind of like to say that. I don't wish, but like it seems like we are going to a very difficult level of this conflict, or a period, or a chapter of this conflict. But we will see.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of my answer to this also is, there's another question that somebody asked about Ruth's position on annexation, and it's my sense at this point in the conflict, and if we want to talk about moving forward to peace, to a vision of ending the conflict, that almost anything that's done unilaterally is wrong. Whether it's taking a piece of land or it's applying legal law, with legally annex, the process of annexation. And both those things right now are taking us backwards from forward. Even if that same action might be okay in a different way. Meaning, it could be that the one-state solution with a one state with equal rights and citizenship for all the people here really is, maybe that's I don't think it's the best solution, but it's something that could work. And but if the way we got there was through a sense of hubris from the Israeli side, or the Israeli right of taking and winning, and we take it all now, it's hard for me to have any sense of empathy or support for that. And I'll tell you honestly, at roots, there's a wide variety of opinions on both sides. There's Palestinians who are one-staters. There are Palestinians who are two-staters. There's Confederation people, and it's actually several Palestinians who have made me more open to annexation, if it includes equal rights. For many people, like we said, the stagnation of the conflict, the lack of trust or hope in the political process between our leading authorities, the lack of trust in those actual authorities, as people are saying, what's the best way to bring bread on the table? What's the best way that I'm going to be able to get to work and have some of a normal life? And if it means it's all Israel, but we have equal rights in there, maybe that's the quicker than going this complicated path of splitting land. And I used to say, what do you mean? But how can we move forward without national determination for both sides and and confederation things? At a certain point, maybe that way is better. And actually, I was talking with an Israeli member of Roots who lives in a settlement, and he's saying he wants to write an article suggesting that with this talk of annexation, the first thing Israel should do towards annexation is to grant full citizenship to all the Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem, as a statement of what it means. And he also meant that as kind of a wake-up call that people can't think we're going to annex land without equal rights between all the people living there. So okay, I'm getting to go back to the question about settlement expansion. Yeah, I live here on the ground. I have friends next door to me who have been living in a portable trailer for the last 20 years and can't build a house or build on that land. It's state land. It wasn't private. There's no private ownership owned there. The land's not going back to a Palestinian village. And I think at some point, things in the conflict where there's some level of recognizing reality on the ground, they should be able to build a regular house. There's areas outside of South Hebron where there's a lot of open land, where if you told me that technically on a level I could be okay with a settlement being expanded there, but I'm not okay with it. Why? Because it normally is because the one part of the settlement movement of settling the land is it's ours and not yours, and we're going to take it, and we're going to take it from you. And I always talk about the settlement enterprises. There's on the one hand there's a fruit and there's a peel. The fruit is like Noor said, the Jewish people have roots in this part of the land. I think a political solution that doesn't recognize and even allow those roots to develop is wrong. But there's also a peel. And the appeal is that they're part of the war between Israel and Palestine, the battle over this land, and who's going to take land. And it's a thing that's been going on for the last 100 years, and it's also employed in that way. And that's the justifications are from the language of war and conflict, and I think it's also important to be open that's right. The question is this: I always put reality here in two perspectives. Is there a peace process? Or is there an existential conflict between Israelis and Palestinians? There's an existential conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. Most Palestinians and most Israelis outside of our little circles don't believe anybody on the other side will ever recognize, ever guarantee their security, ever acknowledge even the very simplest truth that our people belong here. Many of us have lost faith that there's somebody on the other side who feels that. So we see this as a conflict. And any talk about peace is delusional. If you support a peace process and see what could happen here as a peace process, then you end up with a very different perspective. All of a sudden, you have to take account of what the other side thinks and how they see things. But that's a very real. Those are two very different perspectives that are at stake here. And it's true. So going back, straddling those lines and being in a camp that's on one hand is a foot. I think all of our societies on the one hand have a foot in the national game, in the national struggle against the other. And the question is, can we bring that other foot forward, that other side of the hand that can we within this reality, advance the feasibility or the trust or the belief in a peace process?
Thank you. I'm going to skip Sergio's question about annexation because you guys answered it pretty clearly, saying that any step that's unilateral is wrong. Catherine asks, what gives you hope regarding the situation today?
Well, for me, I always say it's not the question of hope. It's like the question of taking responsibility and knowing that, by living here and knowing and realizing what I realized today, and all of these humans that I met on both sides, Palestinians and Israelis, and the two stories that I carry with me now, I feel I have the responsibility to do what I'm doing, to be a member of Roots, to seek peace and always find Israelis and build the bridges between us all the time. I also think that we are in a stuck situation, stuck on a political level, stuck on the social level. But somewhere deep inside me, I believe that there is always something to do. Because if I gave up on this, then for me, I will have maybe no reason even to stay here, to live here, where I'm living today. So I believe that there is always something to do, and this is what keeps me going on. And maybe that's in a way the hope that I have.
I want to go to this question in a second. Just about it, in terms of Roots' position on annexation, we've talked. It's come up obviously in many ways, and I think I think a lot of us stand with what Hanan said. But actually, during this month, we're trying to take some time. Also, we're inviting a kind of a political analyst to give a talk about the ways that could play out and how we're gonna react, where we're gonna be, kind of a person who's really has their finger on the pulse about what's really gonna happen, what could really happen, how it could play out, and to kind of keep that conversation and building of our perspective on what we want to say about it. And do we want to come out with a campaign? That's one of the things that somebody put for us on the table is, to make a campaign with a kind of a throughout society. If it's putting out articles to take this as the challenge of what's going on in the conflict and the political process, to step out a little more, maybe more than we normally do. So we're keeping up with that. In terms of hope, I also echo with Noor. It's the people. Like I said at the beginning, if you look at the forecast, what's going on in the major events on the conflict, there's not a lot of positive things to look forward to. There's some lacks of leadership. There's some things going on from all different corners in the international political stage. I will say though, I think on the Israeli side, in this last election process, one source of hope, and it's kind of I think I mentioned this to Penny yesterday, there's an odd sense of hope of that. Through the 90s, through the peace process, before the 90s, the left was riding triumphantly towards what seemed like was going to be the outplay of the vision of a peace process, and that fell apart. And then through the 2000s, the right wing in Israel has been riding their, and then the Trump coming in and the annexation talk and all these things, riding their high horse and all those things carried a lot of pride. And one place of hope is that in this last election, the right wing kind of got it in their face a little bit. They couldn't put together a coalition. They faced some realities that if you really count down their votes, there's not really that many for there. There's not as big as they thought. It wasn't a sure thing. The left wing also has it's putting its head in black flags and mourning. But I think there's a sense of hopefully one sense that needs work from there is a sense of that we're going to have to listen to this side in order to move forward. both within Israeli society and there. And that's an important process. I think also on the Palestinian side, I also see the sense of, you know, the stalemate between Hamas and Fatah, which is torpedoed the Palestinian nationalship in many ways, is also a similar process. A different story. It's not. I'd like to speak less about that, but I think there's some source. I don't know. It's a kind of a classic story of hope, but of watching these kind of moments of pride that we're sailing forward, sinking for people, for movements, for ideological movements. And hopefully in that there's a little bit of a space for movements from the ground, a little bit more attentive to what's actually there on reality and close to the ground. I think there's a space for things to move forward. And I definitely finish with what keeps me going is the people. It's the people in the partnerships and the people the people that I'm surprised to see come into Roots. My neighbors of mine that I wouldn't have seen as, like Noor called, a Roots person, showing up and getting involved, and that's through their own processes of things changing and being there. So that's definitely inspiring for where we can go. I'd say also in the last year, Roots has really seen kind of the establishment of 3 new chapters that have come. Some of them been in process for several years, but some real things moving. And then so there's those moments of, okay, there's people. It's not a lone voice anymore. It's not just a small group, but there's a group here and a group there. There's still a lot of questions of how we translate those, you know, the challenge of how do we translate these individuals into something more coalesced? How does grassroots work fit into political realities and make those changes, which are important questions, and we're always obviously talking about that. But feeling together in that process and with different voices from different places on the Palestinian and Israeli side is incredibly encouraging. And,
Thank you. In the chat, there's a point made by Madi. I just want to read it and explain. She said, I feel very sad at this talk. I don't see representation of Palestinians besides Noor. Why? And what can be done to encourage that? I assume that Madi's looking at the audience and doesn't see any Palestinians, but this is a program for Americans. It's in English. It's not for Palestinians and it's not for Israelis. It's for one Israeli representative of Roots, Shaul, and one Palestinian representative of Roots, Noor, to explain themselves and present themselves to the American public or the English-speaking public. We have lots and lots and lots of Palestinians in Roots, just like we have lots and lots of Israelis in Roots, but this particular program is not for them. Not that they're not allowed, but it's just not for them. It's in English, a language that most of them aren't completely fluent in. I'm going to a point made here by Myra.
Yeah.
Do you think Palestinians there should have the right to vote in Israeli elections? I guess she's talking about annexation. Shaul, do you want to? And Shaul and Noor? It's that question kind of near the end of the chat. Do you see it?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
No, go for it now. Yeah.
Yeah, so the idea of Palestinians participating in Israeli elections, I mean, this is like, I think maybe many people from outside kind of like find it difficult or confusing. They don't really understand the differences between the areas. Like the difference between a Palestinian who lives in Jerusalem, which is about 25 minutes away by the car from where I live in Bethlehem. A Palestinian who lives in Jerusalem with a Jerusalem residency is living under Israeli civilian law as a permanent resident of Jerusalem, lives under the jurisdiction of Israeli authorities. And we are talking here about 300,000 people that are like this. Some or many of them have actually family members in the West Bank. And those people are allowed to participate in the municipal elections of Jerusalem, the elections of the municipality, but many of the Palestinians choose not to elect in the municipality. And they don't have the right for national elections. Many Palestinians in the West Bank and the rest of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza basically are not Israeli citizens, so we are not allowed to participate in any form of elections in the Israeli side. And we have the elections of the Palestinian Authority that's supposed to be going on from 1996. We had a few elections that happened until 2005, when Hamas got elected in 2006, early of 2006. And that created the Palestinian division, basically, because the international community could not accept Hamas as a terrorist organization defined by the international community to be part of a Palestinian government. So many people, I can say here, are looking forward an election happening in the Palestinian Authority, and think that there is no way, no chance that Israel is going to allow us to elect in the Israeli national elections, because this is going to dramatically change the results, and it's going to change the Knesset, so it's going to change the government, and it's going to change the whole country, the state of Israel. But I never met a Palestinian from my family or my friends or my neighbors who ever think or say that we should, because we are under occupation, that we should participate in Israeli elections. When people bring up the topic of elections, they usually talk about the Palestinian Authority elections, and there is even more talking about like a PLO elections, because the Palestinian Authority elections is not enough, and it's kind of like it takes us to a dead end, because because it's like Hamas scenario, for example, in 2006, when you elect a party that's basically promising to change and promising to fight against corruption, but at the same time, this party is against the peace process, and it's still adopting ideas of of not actually talking to the Israeli side, or not recognizing Israel. So we are kind of stuck. That's exactly what happened when Hamas got elected in 2006. So many people today talking about elections inside the PLO that will basically give a rebirth to the PLO, and it will allow the Palestinians to build a strategy. So that's where most of the talk about elections. But maybe now, with the general feeling that a Palestinian state is behind our back and it's not going to happen, I think more and more people, I imagine that more and more people would feel that they should have a vote, they should have a voice, because they understand that if they are more represented by the Israeli authorities, then they can have more ability to demand their rights. Maybe that applies a lot on the workers, Palestinian workers who work in Israeli market, inside Israel. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to end with Shaul and Noor. Want to say any closing words?
So I think along the type of voting within the citizens of Israel, Palestinian or Arab Israeli citizens of Israel, one of the things that came out of the last election cycle was a tremendous turnout that hadn't been there before, and I think the last election was up to, I don't know, 68%, in the high 60s, maybe 68%, which on the one hand, as a citizen of this country, if you don't vote, you don't have a voice. And that if we look at the societies here through a Western kind of lens of one person, one vote, how can you not go and vote? But in this conflict, any Palestinian voting in an Israeli election is acquiescing to Israeli authority. And so maybe this goes back to Penny's question: why still hold the refugee claim? And this is, I think, one of the transitions that happens to me in Roots. I can point to reasons why the Palestinians are blowing it, and they can point to reasons why we're not blowing it. But at the same point, I want to learn why. Because if I really want to make a change for peace or for war or wherever, I want to make a change in where things are, I need to understand why things are happening the way they are. And what is that Palestinian relationship to state? Why in East Jerusalem, Palestinians in East Jerusalem, if they voted for the same candidate, they would have the mayor of Jerusalem, 2020, would be Palestinian. But to understand what it means that people won't even accede to that authority was a big learning for me of what Jerusalem means, or Al-Quds means in the Palestinian narrative, or what it means in the Muslim narrative. So all those kinds of phenomena of the conflict, where we can sit back and point fingers, are also, I think there's always the incredible moments to really learn and step in there and really what's going on the other side. And that's I think a process that Roots is encouraging on all sides, but for pro-Palestinian people to understand the Israeli narrative more, for Israelis people to understand the Palestinian narrative, because without that, I think in a lot of our hopes and positions about these things, we're missing where the ground is. Yeah, I think that's we endless work of learning. The learning curve here has been woof, and a lot more to go.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Short words of housekeeping. The recording. Noor, you want to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that I still see there are more questions. I know we have limited time and we have to end this, but like it's kind of, I find it again like very excited for me to see that there are more people with more questions and curiosity to know and to understand, and it really make me I don't know how to describe it. Maybe happy, because of this situation. I didn't, I work as a tour guide, and a big part of my job is all the time answering questions and sharing with the people. So, and there was no work now for the last 60 days. I haven't guided any tourists. There are no tourists in Bethlehem, and it seems this will, take for a long time. So I just find it exciting. So thanks for all of the people who participated in this meeting tonight and asked the question.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you, Shaul. Everyone should know that hopefully the recording from this call will be on the Roots website within 2 weeks, so you can share it with your friends. Number 2, I want to remind everyone to donate to Roots. Friendsofroots.net, a little bit or a lot, we really do need your support. Thirdly, I remind everyone that next week, the same day, Monday, half hour later at 9 o'clock Jerusalem time, we'll have an event, a Zoom event relating to Nakba Day, discussing Palestinian perspectives on the Nakba, the Palestinian tragedy of 1948 and the continuing tragedy. And I'll just say at the end, thank you, not just to our panelists, Shaul and Noor, but thank you to everyone for joining us. We had about 47 people at the height of this call. I think that's very, very successful. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day and a good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Shalom. Good morning.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Boker Tov.
Thank you. Boker Tov to the West Coast. Shalom. Bye, Andrew. Bye.
Noor.
Bye, Mom.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Shalom, shalom. B'litraot.